Here are 5 things I hate about living in South Korea. Welcome to another video from the Living Korea channel. Normally we're in the habit of making videos and talking about Korea and usually mentioning the benefits of living here, the good sides, not so much the bad sides. But today it's time to bash. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button, like the video. On the Living Korea channel, I'm in the habit of pointing out the good stuff about South Korea, and I don't spend too much time pointing out the negatives or bashing the country. But today, since I don't think I've ever made a video on the topic that I wanted to talk about today is the time to bash. It's a nice and warm day today, so I just wrote. I was trying to figure out how to structure the video. Initially, I thought I would just count it down from 5 to 1, 1 being the top thing that I hated about South Korea, but really the 5 things that I'm going to talk about are in no particular order. I was not really able to qualify or classify them on which one of these 5 things I hate the most about living in South Korea, so we'll just start from 1 and go all the way to 5. First thing I hate about living in South Korea is the driving culture. I've heard many kinds of excuses that Korea hasn't been exposed to driving for a very long period of time, meaning that cars and such are pretty recent phenomenon here in South Korea. And granted, during the 50s and right after the Korean War, most people did not have a car. Cars were used by either government officials or the military, which is still government officials. And for the most part, the civilians did not have access to cars. There were taxi drivers, I guess, who used to have cars. So after the 80s, when people came into wealth and over the duration of the next 30 years, more and more people were able to acquire cars. And so I guess there's an excuse that Koreans have not been driving long enough to acquire a certain etiquette. But that's all nonsense. The way that people drive and behave in situations of crowdedness, like you see on streets, comes from the cultural setup. And so this point relates to another point that I'm going to make later, and that is that everyone tries to get their kicks before they allow other people's to get ahead. Korea has this mentality of wanting to come first, and although it's considered to be a collectivist country, for the most part, people tend to be pretty selfish. So driving on the street is just a nightmare. Hardly anybody uses signals to indicate which way they're going. As a pedestrian, when I cross the street and I see a car approaching, I would like to know what decisions that particular driver is going to make. And if I see a signal, that driver lets me know that they're going to be turning and I can stop and let them pass, because cars just move faster anyway. But if I don't see a signal in a car and I proceed to pass and this car just continues to drive, chances are that I have to stop. Because the way people drive in Korea is first come, first serve. Meaning that if I'm first in an intersection, then I get to go through the intersection first. And it's the same mentality when it comes to crossing pedestrian crossings. If there is a pedestrian and the car gets there first, then the car will proceed to cross the pedestrian crossing without paying much heed to the actual pedestrians or the people who are trying to cross the street. Korean bali or fast mentality adds to makes speed limits problematic. The country is littered in speed cameras tracking people's speed, and these are necessary simply because otherwise you'd have people driving like maniacs. And when you get out on the highway, you can very much see that. You see people driving at ridiculously high speeds only to slow down to 100 kilometers per hour at the side of cameras. And navigation systems that are built into the cars themselves or that people use on their smartphones always have indicators of when the cameras come up, so that you can speed as fast as the factory would allow you and then slow down at the appropriate time in order not to get caught. Because culturally, older people tend to have the respect that is given to them already by default. Drivers who are older will also use that when driving. You will have people cutting in and people pushing you out just because they need to get there. And you are a secondary thing. I could go on and on about the problems that are existent here in the driving culture in South Korea. But let's just move on to the second point. The second thing I really hate about living in South Korea is the music culture. And yes, I am talking about K-pop. Wherever you turn, it seems like K-pop is the only kind of music that people listen to. You have all ages listening to K-pop, from young kindergartners all the way to the elderly of 60, 75-year-olds. I remember going to a buffet a few years ago, and there was a birthday celebration, and in that room there were about 30 or 40 people gathered together, I guess family members and friends, and there were people of all ages. And I saw 60 or 70-year-old grannies and grandpas jigging it out to K-pop. It's really difficult to find in Korea genres that are not K-pop related. You really have to look hard to find musicians who produce music that are other than K-pop. The mainstream media continues to bombard the public with K-pop music. Articles are always produced by the local news outlets about K-pop. Just the other day I read an article that the production of K-pop music has dropped by 25% due to the coronavirus. What happened to all the other music? Why is it only K-pop that's being reported on? Well, the reason is that K-pop is a huge money-making machine here. And the system is set up in a way that people continue to consume the same monotonous type of music over and over again. And because of the cultural aspects that make Koreans a very that make Korea a very collectivist society, the majority of the population listens to that. In a class of adult students, 19 years and up, I asked about 6 or 7 people, and every single person without fail answered to the question of what's your favorite type of music. Every single one of these people said K-pop. To me, it's mind-boggling to see a group of adults respond in a unanimously equal way in agreement to the type of music that they listen to. Because I know there's good Korean music out there, but it's just really hard to find.
Like a permanent stain and it won't change, even if you go insane.
The third thing I really hate about living in South Korea is this. It's 2020. And even to this day, when you go into smaller neighborhoods, and keep in mind that Korea is a developed country by now, right? It's not a country the way it was 20 years ago that was still being developed and, still relatively new to expats or foreigners arriving here. Korea is a country that has international relationships with the entire world. They've gone through a war which involved international relations. USA came here. Korea has had military bases and foreign presence for nearly 70 years now, almost over 70 years. So foreigners in this country are not a new thing. You see foreigners on television. There are people from all over the world are hosted on television. There are expats living in Ulsan, living in all cities across Korea. And yet, to this day, you still receive stares, occasional stares, particularly from younger kids who are surprised to see a non-Korean face, and even more so, shocked by the fact that this particular non-Korean face can use Korean. What are the parents doing? How is it possible that the kids in this country still are not being taught that there is a big world outside of this tiny little peninsula country? How is that possible? It doesn't happen too often anymore, but it does happen if you visit smaller pockets of the population throughout the country. Number 4. The fourth thing that really grinds my gears about living here in South Korea is the presence of selfishness in a culture that is otherwise perceived as a collective culture. There is a myth that in a collectivist culture, the individual works for the better of the entire society, versus that of the individualistic culture which we see in the West, where the individual tends to look out for themselves. And it's almost beginning to feel like the collectivist explanation of the collectivist culture is kind of hypocritical. You might find people say that, oh, the West is very selfish. People in the West only think about themselves and they don't care about anybody else. When really that's not necessarily true. Yes, true, everybody is individual. Everybody looks out for themselves. But people are not dismissive of everybody else. Because of the fact that we are so aware of our existence and our needs, many people, again, not everybody, but many people are very much aware of the needs of others and are respective of the needs of our others, because we are aware of how we want to be treated, and so we are taught by society in the West that other people need to be treated in a similar way. Whereas in Korea, because of this idea of collectivism, there's a lot of people who are very dismissive of everybody else around them. Let me give you an example. Going to a doctor's office with my kid, we took the elevator. The doctor's office was on the 2nd floor. We took the elevator because my baby was still little, and it was fun to take the elevator. The elevator door was closing, and I saw a woman and a child approaching. I stopped and I opened the door to let the woman in. She came in, we got to the 2nd floor, and the door opened, and this person just bolted right in front of me and ran into the doctor's office and registered ahead of me. There was no thank you for opening the door. There was no please go ahead. Since you opened the door for me and you were on the elevator first, you should go ahead and register first. None of that. I just want to say I'm not petty. It doesn't matter. It didn't really change my life in any way, but I became aware of how self-absorbed this woman was. And it could have been just an individual thing, but I guarantee you that people who have been living in Korea for long enough will tell you of stories that are very similar to this one. This idea of selfishness in a collectivist country also extends to other aspects of life, like employment. Because, like somebody mentioned on the internet, a lot of companies lack the foresight to plan ahead and take one step at a time in their development. Employees coming to work will often find being assigned to work that is supposed to be done right now. And this is oftentimes the result of employers not considering the lives of their employees, or just not thinking ahead, or considering how their last minute demands might affect other people's lives. And the fifth and final thing that really gets me about living here in South Korea is the still very masculine dominated society that Korea has built itself upon. In Korea, there is a perception that if you're an older male, you have all the rights of all the gods in existence and you rule the world, however small it may be in your mind. And if you're a younger man, you need to hop to the tune of the older men. If you're a woman, there's nothing you can do. I know that for a fact. My wife runs a business here in South Korea, and every time she comes in contact with an older male here in South Korea, she has to deal with a lot of bullshit. She has to deal with a lot of bullshit from men here who aren't even older than her. This, of course, does not apply to every single man in Korea, but it does apply to the vast majority of the older generation. Right, so that's it. That's it for the 5 things that I really hate about living in South Korea. These are just 5 things on top of all the other wonderful things, but they do provide kind of an essence of what it's like to be living in South Korea. Before making this video, I looked on the internet and I saw a lot of things that people talked about. There's stuff like cleanliness and toilets and mosquitoes and stuff. Things that I thought were either very outdated, because toilets in Korea are really clean. I mean, they're toilets, and if they're public toilets, then of course every public toilet will have some smell to them. Occasionally you will find some squatting toilets as well. So again, that information is kind of outdated. Mosquitoes, if you complain about mosquitoes in Korea, you've never been to Winnipeg, Canada, the capital of mosquitoes worldwide. And so I will conclude this video with the regular spiel of: make sure that if you are new to this video, to this channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button, like the video if you liked it, if it was helpful in any way, and make sure to check out some of my other videos that are either related to South Korea or, well, no, that's it. That's all the videos are related to. And come back for more. Oh yeah, and check out the other videos on the channel as well. Laters.